The fluorescent lights in the VA hospital burned cold and clinical, nothing like the desert sun Colonel James Hatcher had known for 40 years of service. He sat in the examination room wearing a paper gown that rustled with every breath, feeling more exposed than he ever had under enemy fire. The oncologist, a woman young enough to be his granddaughter, looked at him with practiced sympathy that made his jaw tighten. 6 months, she said. Maybe less if the pancreatic cancer decided to be aggressive, and from the scans, it looked hungry. She recommended palliative care, hospice arrangements, getting his affairs in order. All the gentle euphemisms people use when they mean you should go home and wait to die. Hatcher thanked her with the same courtesy he'd shown every officer who'd ever given him orders, walked out of that hospital into the North Carolina morning, and made a decision that would define his last days on Earth. He wasn't going to waste them in a bed, watching daytime television and pretending the morphine made things better. He was going to spend them doing what warriors do, fighting. Fort Bragg sprawled before him as he drove through the gates, familiar as his own heartbeat. 38 years he'd walked these grounds. From a fresh-faced lieutenant in 1987 to the Silver Eagle on his collar now, he'd given everything to this place, to the men and women who wore the uniform. The question burning in his chest wasn't whether he'd done enough. It was whether he'd leave anything behind that mattered. The answer stood on the training range, barking orders at a fire team running close-quarters drills. Captain Sarah McKenna moved like water through the kill house, her M4 carbine an extension of her body. Each step calculated, each shot precise. 29 years old, 5'7" of controlled aggression and tactical brilliance. She'd made it through Delta Force selection 9 months ago, one of only 4 women to ever earn that right, and she wore it like armor. Too much armor, Hatcher thought, like she was afraid that one mistake would prove every doubter right. He watched her run the course 3 times, never satisfied, always finding flaws in perfection. That's what he'd seen in her from the beginning, that relentless drive that could either forge a legend or break a soldier in half. She reminded him of someone, though it took him years to realize who. Herself. She reminded him of who she was trying to become, not who she actually was. After the 3rd run, Hatcher caught her eye. She jogged over, sweat darkening her uniform, breathing controlled despite the exertion. "Colonel, Captain, got a minute?" Sarah glanced back at her team. "We were just finishing up, sir." "In my office. This isn't optional." Something in his tone made her nod. 20 minutes later, she sat across from him in the small office that smelled of old coffee and older memories. Commendations on the walls, photos of men who died under his command, their faces frozen in moments before they knew what war really cost. Hatcher didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I'm dying." Sarah's expression didn't change, but he saw her fingers tighten on the armrest. "Sir?" "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors give me 6 months." He leaned back in his chair, watching her process this. "I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because I need your help with something unofficial." "How unofficial?" "The kind that doesn't appear in any after-action report." Sarah met his eyes, and for the first time since he'd known her, he saw her guard drop just slightly. "What's the mission?" Hatcher pulled a folder from his desk drawer, slid it across to her. "You know Victor Keller?" "General Keller, head of Special Operations Command Southwest?" Sarah opened the folder, started scanning. "He gave a speech at my graduation from selection, talked about honor and sacrifice. Victor and I went through the academy together, served in Vietnam, Gulf War, Iraq. He was my best friend for 30 years. Hatcher's voice went flat. "He's also been running illegal arms to Mexican cartels for the last 15 years. The silence stretched between them. Sarah looked up from the folder, her face unreadable. "These photos," she said slowly, "are those Stinger missiles? Taken 3 weeks ago at a cartel compound in the Sonoran Desert. That's U.S. military hardware, Sarah. Weapons that should be in our armories are ending up in the hands of drug traffickers. People who use them to shoot down Mexican police helicopters, threaten border towns, kill American citizens." Sarah flipped through more pages. Transaction records, intercepted communications, satellite imagery. The evidence was damning and detailed. "Why not take this to CID, JAG? This is enough to bury him. Because Victor has friends in every corner of the Pentagon. I've tried official channels. Every report gets buried. Every investigation stalls out." Hatcher leaned forward. "I have 6 months to live, Captain. I don't have time for bureaucracy. What I have time for is justice. What exactly are you proposing? I'm putting together a team, small off the books. We infiltrate the compound, retrieve the physical ledger Victor keeps with every transaction, every name of everyone he's paid off. Hard evidence that can't be buried. Then we extract and bring him to justice the right way. Sarah closed the folder, her tactical mind already working through the problems. That compound is 40 miles inside Arizona near the Mexican border, cartel territory. How many hostiles? Intelligence says 60 to 80 fighters, mix of cartel soldiers and private military contractors Victor hired for security. And your team? 4 people, you, me, and 2 others I trust. The math was absurd. 4 against 80 in hostile territory with no official support. Sarah should have said no. Any sane operator would have. Instead, she asked the only question that mattered. Why me? Hatcher stood, moved to the window overlooking the training grounds. Your father was Captain Richard McKenna, Korean War, Chosin Reservoir. Did you know he saved my father's life during the breakout? Sarah's jaw tightened. He never talked about the war. Most of the good ones don't. Hatcher turned back to her. December 1950, Chinese forces surrounded the 1st Marine Division. 30,000 Americans trapped in sub-zero temperatures, outnumbered 5 to 1. Your father's platoon was tasked with holding a ridge so the main force could retreat. My father, a green lieutenant, froze up under fire. Literally froze, couldn't move, couldn't think. Your father grabbed him, slapped him across the face, said, "Lieutenant, your men are watching. Die scared or die brave, but don't die useless." Hatcher's voice roughened with memory. My father fought, held that ridge, got 14 men out alive, including himself. Came home, had me, told me that story 100 times. Made me promise that if I ever became an officer, I'd remember that leadership isn't about never being afraid. It's about not letting fear make you useless. Sarah sat perfectly still, but he could see the emotion working behind her eyes. Your father died following orders in a war that didn't make sense, fighting for a system that didn't always deserve his sacrifice. But he did it with honor. He did it right. Hatcher moved back to his desk. You have his discipline, his precision, but you're missing something he had. You're so busy proving you belong that you've forgotten why you joined in the first place. And why did I join, sir? To make sure soldiers like your father don't die for nothing. To fix the broken parts of the system from the inside. He tapped the folder. This is broken, Sarah. A general selling weapons to criminals because the system let him. Your father would have fixed it, rules or no rules. Sarah picked up the folder again, but this time her hands were steady with purpose. When do we leave? 3 days. I need to brief the others first. Who else is on the team? Sergeant Major Robert Garrett. We call him Bull. Served with me in the Gulf War. Did 3 tours in Iraq. Best heavy weapons man I've ever seen and loyal to a fault. And the 4th? Lieutenant Michael Chen, combat medic, 26 years old. His father was a South Vietnamese officer we evacuated from Saigon in '75. The boy grew up hearing about American honor, about soldiers who kept their promises. He volunteered the moment I told him what this was about. Sarah stood. With respect, sir, this is a suicide mission. 4 against 80, no support, no extraction plan if things go sideways. I know, and you're dying anyway, so you've got nothing to lose. Also true. What about the rest of us? Hatcher met her eyes. I'm not ordering you, Captain. I'm asking. If you walk out that door right now, there's no shame in it. This isn't your fight. Sarah moved to the door, her hand on the knob. For a long moment, she stood there, and Hatcher wondered if he'd miscalculated. Then she turned back. My father died in a war he didn't start, following orders he didn't question, for a country that forgot him the moment he was buried. If I'm going to risk dying, sir, I'd rather it be for something I chose. She squared her shoulders. I'm in. But we do this smart. We plan every detail, we account for every variable, and we give ourselves a fighting chance. Hatcher smiled, the first real smile he'd managed since the diagnosis. That's exactly why I picked you. 3 days later, they gathered in a safe house outside Tucson, Arizona. The August heat pressed against the windows like a physical weight, but inside the air conditioning kept the temperature almost comfortable. Almost. Bull Garrett looked exactly like his name suggested. 6'2", 240 pounds of muscle going slightly soft around the middle, with a face carved from granite and scarred by 30 years of close calls. He'd known Hatcher since they were both lieutenants in Saudi Arabia, had saved Hatcher's life twice and been saved by him 3 times. The kind of friendship that didn't need words. Michael Chen was slighter, maybe 5'9", but with the wiry strength of someone who'd grown up fighting for everything he had. His father had been a South Vietnamese ranger, one of the thousands who trusted American promises during the evacuation of Saigon. Michael Sr. made it out with his infant son, built a life in California, and never stopped believing in the country that had saved him. He'd raised Michael on stories of American soldiers who'd kept their word when it would have been easier to run. Looking at them gathered around the tactical map spread across the table, Hatcher felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. These people were trusting him with their lives. He was trusting them with his legacy. The target, Hatcher began, placing a satellite photo on the table, is a fortified compound 60 miles northeast of here, just inside the Arizona border. Former ranch, now a cartel operations center. Our intelligence indicates General Keller is using it as a distribution hub for weapons smuggling. Sarah leaned over the map, her finger tracing possible approach roads. Security? 60 to 80 cartel soldiers, plus an estimated 20 private military contractors. Former SEALs, Rangers, Special Forces who've gone private. They're not amateurs. Bull whistled low. 4 against 100. I've had worse odds. Name one time. Can't, but I'm sure it happened. The moment of levity broke some of the tension. Michael spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. What's the objective? Just reconnaissance? Negative. Hatcher placed another photo, this one showing a reinforced building in the compound center. Keller keeps a physical ledger in his command center. Old school, no digital trail. Every transaction, every name, every dollar. We retrieve that ledger, extract with it intact, and deliver it to people Keller hasn't bought off yet. Sarah straightened. Extraction plan? That's the complicated part. We can't use military assets, can't risk this getting shut down before we have evidence. We drive in civilian vehicles, approach on foot, infiltrate during the pre-dawn hours when guard rotation is weakest. And if we're compromised, Michael asked. Hatcher met each of their eyes in turn. Then we adapt. Sarah, that's where you come in. You grew up in desert country. Your grandfather taught you Navajo tracking and survival skills. If this goes sideways and we're scattered, you're our insurance policy. You know this terrain better than any of us. Sarah nodded slowly. The Sonoran Desert isn't forgiving. Summer temperatures hit 120 during the day. Water sources are scarce and usually controlled. If we get separated out there without gear, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Which is why we don't get separated, Bull said. He tapped the map with a thick finger. We move as a unit, we fight as a unit, we extract as a unit. They spent the next 8 hours planning every detail. Approach routes and fallback positions, communications protocols, and rally points. They inventoried equipment, tested radios, synchronized watches. Sarah insisted on carrying extra water purification tablets and emergency rations, stuff the others considered overkill. Hatcher noticed but didn't comment. Her caution might save their lives. As the sun set and the Arizona desert cooled from unbearable to merely oppressive, they loaded into 2 civilian trucks. Hatcher rode with Sarah, Bull, and Michael in the second vehicle. The drive took them through empty country, past abandoned ranches and failed dreams baking under an indifferent sky. Sir, Sarah said after an hour of silence, can I ask you something? You've earned that right. Why did Keller do it? He had everything, respect, rank, a career most officers would kill for. Why throw it away? Hatcher watched the desert roll past. Vietnam, he said finally. We were both there in '71. Different units, but we crossed paths during operations near the DMZ. One night his platoon got ambushed. 32 men pinned down by NVA regulars. Victor called for fire support, called for air cover, called for permission to engage with everything he had. What happened? Command denied him, said the enemy was too close to a village, risk of civilian casualties too high, ordered him to hold position and wait for extraction. Hatcher's hands tightened on the wheel. Extraction never came. By dawn, he'd lost 12 men, 12 boys who died waiting for permission to save themselves. Sarah absorbed this. He learned the wrong lesson. He learned that sometimes the rules get you killed. Problem is, he decided that meant rules don't matter. Spent the next 40 years proving it. Hatcher glanced at her. That's the difference between a warrior and a warlord, Sarah. A warrior knows when to bend the rules. A warlord thinks he's above them entirely. They drove in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah found herself thinking about her father, about Chosin Reservoir, about men who'd followed orders into frozen hell and come out the other side. Had her father ever questioned his orders? Had he ever wanted to break the rules that got so many of his friends killed? She'd never know. He died when she was 12, a training accident at Fort Benning that the Army called tragic and unavoidable. She'd grown up with his absence like a weight in her chest, driving her to prove something she could never quite articulate, that she was worthy of his sacrifice, that his daughter could be as good as his son would have been. 15 miles from the target, they pulled off the road into a dry wash. The second truck pulled in behind them. They'd cover the remaining distance on foot, moving through the pre-dawn darkness when the desert was coolest and the guards most likely to be drowsy. Bull distributed weapons from the truck bed, M4 carbines with suppressors, night vision goggles, tactical vests, enough ammunition to fight their way through a small war. Michael checked his medical kit with practiced efficiency while Sarah studied the terrain through her binoculars. "A lot of open ground," she murmured. "If they spot us early, we'll be pinned down with no cover." "Then we don't get spotted," Hatcher said. He checked his watch. "We have 4 hours until dawn. That's our window. Move silent, move smart, get in and out before the sun comes up." They set out in a staggered column, Hatcher on point, Sarah second, Bull bringing up the rear with Michael in the middle. The desert night was surprisingly cold, the temperature having dropped 40 degrees from the afternoon high. Sarah's breath misted in the air as they navigated through creosote bushes and around saguaro cacti that stood like silent sentinels in the darkness. 2 hours in, Sarah noticed Hatcher's breathing getting labored. He was trying to hide it, but she'd been watching him too long to miss the signs. The cancer was eating him from the inside, stealing his strength one day at a time. Part of her wanted to call a halt, force him to rest. The other part knew he'd never forgive her for it. They were 3 miles from the compound when everything went wrong. The ambush came from 3 sides simultaneously. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness, bullets snapping through the air around them. Not random fire, coordinated and professional. Someone had known they were coming. "Contact front!" Bull's voice cut through the chaos as he opened up with his SAW, providing suppressing fire. Hatcher pulled Sarah down behind a boulder. "They were waiting for us." "How?" Sarah returned fire, dropping 2 shapes moving through the darkness. Nobody knew about this mission. "Somebody did." Hatcher keyed his radio. "Bull, Michael, fall back to Rally Point Alpha. We're compromised." But Rally Point Alpha was 2 miles behind them, and the enemy had them boxed in. Sarah could see it in the muzzle flashes, in the way they were maneuvering. Professional tactics, closing the trap. Then she heard the voice over a loudspeaker, amplified across the desert. "James Hatcher, I know you're out there, old friend. Stand down and we can talk about this like reasonable men." Hatcher's face went pale in the moonlight. "Victor, General Victor Keller, somewhere in the darkness, commanding his mercenaries like pieces on a chessboard. You don't have to die tonight, James, neither do your people. Lay down your weapons and let's discuss this." Sarah looked at Hatcher. "Sir, he'll kill us the moment we surrender. Then we fight our way out. Against this many, we won't make it 50 yards. Michael crawled up beside them, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "We're flanked on both sides. They're trying to drive us north, away from the vehicles." Bull's voice crackled over the radio. "Colonel, we need a decision. We can't hold this position." Sarah's mind raced through options, all of them bad. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and running out of time. In another 10 minutes, full daylight would expose them completely. Then she looked at the terrain around them, the dry wash to the north, the ridgeline to the east. The endless expanse of the Sonoran Desert stretching away like a sea of sand and stone. "Sir," she said quietly, "I can lead them away." Hatcher turned to her. "What?" "They want you. They want whatever you know about Keller's operation. If I break north, make noise, draw their attention, you 3 can fall back to the vehicles. That's suicide. That's tactics." Sarah checked her ammunition. 3 magazines left. "The desert's my territory, sir. I grew up learning every trick my grandfather knew about surviving out here. If I can get far enough ahead, lose them in the terrain, I can link up with you at the extraction point in 48 hours. 48 hours in the desert with no support? I've done it before. Delta selection, survival week. 5 days with nothing but a knife and a canteen. I made it through." She met his eyes. "This is what you trained me for, sir. Let me do my job." Hatcher's face showed the war raging inside him. Command versus compassion. Mission versus morality. Bull settled it. "She's right, Colonel. We're dead if we stay here. At least this way, three of us make it out. Michael nodded agreement, though Sarah could see the fear in his eyes. Hatcher reached out, gripped Sarah's shoulder. 48 hours. Rally Point Bravo, the old mining camp 15 miles northwest of here. I'll be there, Sarah. Hatcher's voice roughened. Your father would be proud of what you're doing. I'm proud of what you're doing. She felt something crack in her chest, but there was no time for emotion. I'll see you in 2 days, sir. Don't be late. Then she was moving, breaking north at a full sprint, firing her M4 in controlled bursts to draw attention. Behind her, she heard Hatcher's voice over the radio. All elements, fall back to vehicles. McKenna's buying us time. Don't waste it. The enemy took the bait. Lights swung toward her. Voices shouted in Spanish and English. She ran through the darkness, using every bit of terrain, every shadow, every skill her Navajo grandfather had taught her during childhood summers in the desert. Behind her, gunfire intensified as Hatcher's team fought their way south. Then the sound began to fade, and she knew they'd broken contact. 3 against impossible odds, and they'd made it out. Now it was her turn to survive. She ran for 30 minutes straight, putting distance between herself and the compound. When she finally stopped to catch her breath behind a cluster of barrel cacti, she could hear vehicles in the distance. They were hunting her with trucks, using spotlights to sweep the desert. Sarah checked her supplies. 2 full magazines, 1 partial. Her tactical vest held her knife, emergency beacon, fire starter, and 2 energy bars. Her canteen was 3/4 full, not enough to survive what was coming, but enough to start with. She heard the voice again, amplified through the night. Captain McKenna, I presume. This is General Victor Keller. Your colonel speaks highly of you. Sarah didn't respond, just kept moving. I know you're out there. I know you're alone, and I know this desert will kill you long before you reach help. Keller's voice was almost friendly, but it doesn't have to be this way. Surrender now and I'll see you're treated fairly. You're a soldier, not a criminal. This isn't your fight. Sarah's jaw tightened. She keyed her radio, knowing they could track the transmission, but not caring. With respect, General, go to hell. Keller's laugh echoed across the desert. Spirited, I like that. Tell you what, Captain, I'm going to give you a sporting chance. My men will stop pursuing at dawn. If you can survive 72 hours in this desert and make it to civilization, I'll let you go. Consider it a test of that famous Delta Force training. Sarah knew alone when she heard one, but she also knew Keller was arrogant enough to believe she'd die on her own. Of course, Keller continued, if you fail, if the desert claims you like it's claimed so many others, well, that's just nature taking its course. The radio went silent. Sarah looked east and saw the faint gray line of approaching dawn. She had maybe an hour before the sun turned this desert into a furnace. She thought of her father at Chosen Reservoir, holding that frozen ridge against impossible odds. She thought of Hatcher in that hospital, choosing to fight rather than fade away. She thought of every person who had ever told her she didn't belong, that a woman couldn't cut it in Delta Force, that she was only here to fill a quota. 72 hours, she whispered to the desert. Let's see what I'm really made of. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the eastern mountains, Sarah McKenna disappeared into the Sonoran Desert. Behind her, 3 men drove through the night, believing she'd bought them escape at the cost of her own life. Ahead of her lay 60 miles of the most unforgiving terrain in North America. Temperatures that would climb past 120 degrees, and a deadline that was already counting down. But Sarah had something her pursuers didn't understand. She had knowledge. She had training. And she had the stubborn refusal to quit that her father had passed down to her, the same trait that had kept him alive on a frozen Korean hillside while better-equipped men fell around him. The desert stretched before her like a test written in sand and stone and merciless sun. Most people would see it as a death sentence. Sarah McKenna saw it as an opportunity to prove that everything Hatcher had taught her, everything her father had died believing, everything she'd survived to earn that Delta Force tab, all of it was real. She walked into the rising sun, and the desert swallowed her whole. Miles away, in the safe house outside Tucson, Hatcher sat with his head in his hands while Bull cleaned a minor gunshot wound on Michael's arm. They'd made it out. 3 men alive because one soldier had decided their lives were worth more than her own safety. She'll make it, Bull said, though his voice lacked conviction. That kid's tougher than boot leather. Hatcher didn't respond. He was thinking about Richard McKenna on a frozen ridge in Korea, about the choice between dying scared or dying brave. About how some debts can never truly be repaid, only pass forward to the next generation. "Sir," Michael said quietly, "what do we do now?" Hatcher lifted his head. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes burned with purpose. "We wait. We prepare. And in 48 hours, we're going back into that desert to find her." He stood, moved to the weapons locker. "Because that's what warriors do. We don't leave anyone behind, not alive, not ever." Outside, the Arizona sun climbed higher, baking the earth beneath its relentless gaze. Somewhere out there, Sarah McKenna was learning what it truly meant to survive, and 3 men were learning what it meant to have faith. The next 48 hours would test them all in ways they couldn't imagine. But that's a story for another telling. For now, the desert kept its secrets, and the only sound was the wind moving through the creosote bushes, ancient and patient and utterly without mercy. The sun came up like judgment over the Sonoran Desert, and with it came the heat. Sarah McKenna felt it on her face first, that gentle warmth that promised murder by midday. She'd been moving for 3 hours since breaking contact with Keller's forces, putting distance between herself and the hunting parties she could hear in the valleys behind her. Now, as dawn painted the sky in shades of copper and gold, she allowed herself to stop and think. 10 miles, maybe 12. She'd covered good ground in the darkness, using terrain features to mask her movement, staying in the washes and low areas where shadows pulled deepest. But distance meant nothing if she didn't have a plan. Rally Point Bravo, the abandoned silver mine where Hatcher and the others would wait, lay 60 miles northwest. Between her and safety stretched an ocean of sand and stone that had killed better prepared people than her. Sarah found a shallow cave in a rock outcropping, nothing more than an erosion hollow, really, but it put stone between her and the rising sun. She drank from her canteen just enough to wet her mouth and inventoried what she had. 2 full magazines for her M4, 1 partial, her tactical knife, fire starter, 2 energy bars, the emergency beacon that she wouldn't activate unless death was certain, because the moment she did, Keller would know exactly where to send his hunters. What she didn't have was water beyond the half canteen remaining, didn't have shelter beyond this cave, didn't have backup or extraction or any of the things that kept soldiers alive in hostile territory. What she did have was knowledge. Sarah closed her eyes and heard her grandfather's voice, old Tommy Bluehorse, who taught her to read the desert like other kids read picture books. He'd been Navajo, married to her grandmother against both families' wishes, and he'd spent 30 years as a park ranger in the Mojave before retiring to a small house outside Phoenix. Sarah had spent every summer between ages 7 and 12 with him, learning things the Army never taught. "The desert is not empty, little hawk," he'd told her, using the nickname he'd given her after watching her climb a cliff face at age 8. "It is full of life, full of water, full of everything you need. You just have to know how to see it." Sarah opened her eyes and looked at what most people would call wasteland. She saw resources. The creosote bushes growing in clusters indicated underground moisture. Their roots went deep, following water through layers of kaladish and sandstone. Where they grew thickest, water was closest to the surface. The barrel cacti dotting the landscape held moisture in their flesh, bitter but drinkable if extracted properly. The tracks in the sand, faint but visible to trained eyes, showed where animals moved, and animals always knew where water was. More importantly, she saw the land itself, the way it folded and creased, the ancient dry washes that had carried flash floods for millennia. This was August, monsoon season in the Sonoran. The rains hadn't come yet this year, but when they did, water would flow in torrents through these channels. And where water flowed, it left behind gifts. Tinajas, those natural stone tanks that held water long after the flood passed. Sarah studied the terrain, reading the geology like a map. There, 3 miles northeast, a dark line of cliffs that suggested basalt formations. Basalt held water better than sandstone, created deeper tinajas. If she could reach those cliffs, she had a chance. She waited until the sun cleared to the eastern mountains, watching the way light fell across the land, noting which direction the heat shimmer rose from. Heat shimmer meant moisture evaporating. Moisture meant life. Then she moved. The desert in daylight was a different animal than the cool darkness she'd fled through. The temperature climbed with brutal efficiency, passing 90 before she'd gone a mile, heading for 100 as she crossed the second. Sarah adjusted her tactics, moving in short bursts from shade to shade, using the creosote bushes and palo verde trees as cover. She wrapped her head in cloth torn from her undershirt, creating a crude keffiyeh that protected her face and neck from direct sun. Every 20 minutes she stopped, found shade, and forced herself to rest. The instinct was to push hard, to eat up the distance as fast as possible. But that instinct got people killed out here. The desert rewarded patience and punished hurry. By the time she reached the cliffs, the temperature had climbed past 110. Sarah's shirt was soaked with sweat, her breathing fast and shallow. She drunk the last of her canteen an hour ago, and her mouth felt lined with cotton. But she'd made it to the basalt, and that meant possibility. She moved along the base of the cliffs, studying the rock face, looking for the telltale signs: dark staining on stone, green moss in crevices, the white mineral deposits that marked where water seeped and evaporated over centuries. There, 20 yards ahead, a fold in the rock where the cliff face curved inward. Sarah climbed carefully, testing each handhold. The basalt was sharp, volcanic glass that could slice skin, but it was also solid. She pulled herself up into the fold and found what she'd been hoping for: a tinaja, a natural basin carved into the rock by countless floods. And in that basin, maybe 3 gallons of water, cloudy with sediment, but liquid and real. She wanted to plunge her face into it, drink until her belly ached. Instead, she forced herself to slow down, pulled off her shirt and used it as a filter, letting the water seep through the fabric to remove the worst of the sediment. Drank slowly, letting her body absorb the moisture rather than overwhelming her system. The water tasted of stone and algae, but it was the sweetest thing she'd ever known. When she'd drunk enough to ease the desperate thirst, Sarah filled her canteen and sat back against the rock wall. The cave provided shade, and with water secured, she had time to think. 48 hours, Hatcher had said. 48 hours to reach Rally Point Bravo, the old silver mine 15 miles northwest of the compound they'd tried to hit. From where she sat now, that was probably 50 miles of hard desert travel. 50 miles with limited water, no food except 2 energy bars, and Keller's men potentially hunting her. The smart play would be to activate the beacon, call for extraction. But that would bring Keller's people down on her like wolves on wounded prey. Worse, it would mean Hatcher had sacrificed the mission for nothing. The ledger was still in that compound, the evidence that could bring down a corrupt general and everyone he'd bought. If Sarah gave up now, Keller won. The system stayed broken. Her father's death, Hatcher's cancer, all the soldiers who trusted in honor and duty, all of it meaningless. No, Sarah said aloud to the empty cave, not happening. She spent the heat of the day in that cave, conserving energy while the desert baked under a merciless sun. Through the narrow opening, she could see heat waves rising from the sand like transparent flames. Nothing moved except the vultures riding thermals high above. Even the lizards, creatures born to this heat, had gone to ground. Sarah used the time to prepare. She cut strips from her tactical vest, wove them into cord, gathered ocotillo branches from outside the cave, cut them to length with her knife. The spines on ocotillo were straight and sharp, and with careful work, she could shape them into tools: fish hooks, needles, even small projectile points if she needed them. Her grandfather's voice again, a memory from when she was 9 and had gotten lost during a camping trip in the Mojave. He'd found her after 8 hours sitting under a creosote bush, crying. "Why do you cry, little hawk?" "I was scared. I thought I'd die out here." Tommy Bluehorse had knelt beside her, his weathered face serious. The desert does not care if you are scared. It does not care if you live or die. It simply is. So you must decide who you are, someone who waits to be saved or someone who saves herself. Sarah had stopped crying then. Her grandfather had spent the next 2 hours teaching her how to find water, how to read the land, how to see the desert as a place of abundance rather than absence. She'd never forgotten those lessons, though she'd had little use for them in the years since. Delta Force training emphasized high-tech solutions, satellite communications, and air support. Nobody taught you how to weave cord from canvas or chip stone into cutting tools. But her grandfather had, and now, 30 years and a lifetime later, those lessons were keeping her alive. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Sarah moved again. The temperature was still over 100, but that was almost comfortable compared to the 120 hell of midday. She drunk her fill from the tinaja, refilled her canteen, and marked the location in her memory. If she needed to return, she could find this place again. She headed northwest, using the angle of the late afternoon sun to guide her. The terrain grew rougher here, more broken. Good for concealment, hard on the legs. She scrambled over boulder fields and crossed shallow arroyos, always moving, always putting distance between herself and pursuit. 2 hours before sunset, she heard the vehicles. Sarah froze behind a stand of saguaro cacti, their massive arms providing cover. The sound came from the south, multiple engines running hard across open ground. They were sweeping the desert, searching in a grid pattern, looking for her. She watched through a gap in the cacti as 3 pickup trucks bounced across the terrain half a mile away. Men stood in the beds, armed with rifles, scanning the landscape. Too far to see faces, but close enough to be dangerous. If they expanded their search pattern, if they happened to choose this direction, they'd spot her within minutes. Sarah assessed her options. Running would leave tracks in the sandy soil, tracks they'd spot immediately. Standing her ground meant hoping they chose a different path. Fighting was suicide, 3 rifles against maybe a dozen. So she did what her grandfather had taught her. She became invisible. Sarah pressed herself against the base of the largest saguaro, matching her breathing to the rhythm of the wind moving through the cactus spines. She scattered loose sand over her boots, dulling the artificial shine, pulled her shirt up to cover her face, leaving only her eyes exposed. And she waited. The trucks came closer, their engines growing louder. Sarah could hear men shouting to each other in Spanish now, could see the sun glinting off rifle barrels. They were professionals, these hunters. Not random cartel soldiers, but trained contractors. The kind who'd learned their trade in Iraq or Afghanistan before selling those skills to the highest bidder. One of the trucks stopped maybe 200 yards from her position. A man climbed down, scanned the terrain with binoculars. Sarah held her breath, willing herself to merge with the stone and sand and ancient cactus at her back. The man swept his binoculars across the landscape, pausing on the very cluster where she hid. 5 seconds, 10. 15 seconds of absolute stillness while Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Then the man lowered his binoculars, said something to the driver, climbed back in the truck. The vehicle moved on, continuing its sweep to the west. Sarah waited until the engine sounds faded completely before she allowed herself to breathe normally. That had been close, closer than she wanted to admit, and it meant Keller was serious about finding her. He devoted significant resources to the hunt, which told her something important. He was afraid of what she might accomplish if she survived. Good. Fear meant respect, and respect meant he'd made the mistake of underestimating her once. He wouldn't do it again. As twilight fell and the desert cooled, Sarah moved with renewed purpose. The hunting party had swept west, which meant that direction was temporarily clear. She angled northwest, climbing into higher ground where the rock formations offered better cover and the terrain was too rough for vehicles. Night brought its own challenges. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 2 hours, going from furnace heat to near freezing. Sarah's sweat-soaked clothing became a liability, drawing heat from her body. She found an overhang, gathered dead cholla branches and dried creosote, and used her fire starter to create a small flame. The fire was a risk. Smoke could be seen for miles, flames visible from even farther. But hypothermia killed just as dead as bullets, and she needed to dry her clothing and warm her core temperature. She kept the fire small, feeding it carefully, using the overhang to disperse the smoke. As the flames crackled, Sarah allowed herself to eat one of her energy bars. The food sat heavy in her stomach, her body unused to solid nutrition after a day of stress and exertion. But she needed the calories, needed the energy for tomorrow's push. Tomorrow she'd try to cover 20 miles. Put herself within striking distance of Rally Point Bravo. Another day beyond that to reach the old silver mine, where Hatcher would be waiting, if he was still alive. If Keller hadn't sent teams after the rest of the group too. Sarah pushed that thought away. Hatcher had Bull Garrett with him, and Bull was worth any 5 normal soldiers. Michael Chen was green but smart, and more importantly, they had vehicles. They could move fast, put distance between themselves and pursuit. They were fine. They had to be fine. She fed the fire another branch and watched sparks spiral up into the night sky. Above her, stars emerged in their millions. The Milky Way, a river of light cutting across the darkness. The same stars her father had seen in Korea. The same stars Hatcher had navigated by decades ago. The same stars that had guided warriors and wanderers since humans first walked upright. "I'm still here," Sarah said to those stars, "still fighting." The desert offered no response, but she hadn't expected one. The desert didn't care about human drama, human struggles. It simply existed, patient and eternal, and utterly indifferent to individual fate, which meant survival was entirely up to her. Sarah slept in short bursts, waking every hour to feed the fire and check her surroundings. The night was alive with sounds most people never heard. Coyotes yipping in the distance, the rustle of kangaroo rats foraging for seeds, the soft whoosh of an owl's wings passing overhead. Each sound told a story, provided information. Where predators hunted, where prey moved, where water might be found. Just before dawn, Sarah heard something that didn't belong. The distant rumble of engines, multiple vehicles moving fast. She climbed to a higher vantage point and saw lights on the southern horizon, maybe 5 miles away. Headlights sweeping back and forth in a search pattern. They were still hunting, and they'd expanded their search grid. Sarah broke camp quickly, scattering the fire and covering the ashes with sand. She needed to move before full light, needed to put more distance between herself and the hunters. But more importantly, she needed to change her tactics. They expected her to run northwest, to try reaching friendly territory. So she'd give them what they expected, but with a twist. Sarah spent the next hour creating false trails. She walked heavily in soft sand, leaving clear boot prints heading northwest. Then she backtracked carefully, stepping in her own footprints, and branched off at right angles, moving across bare rock that held no tracks. She broke branches at intervals, the kind of sign a tired person might leave accidentally. Led the false trail to a dead-end canyon, then exited via a different route entirely. By the time the sun rose, she'd created 3 false trails, all leading pursuers away from her actual path. It wouldn't fool them forever, maybe not even for long, but it might buy her a few hours, and hours could mean the difference between life and death out here. The second day was harder than the first. Sarah's body was beginning to feel the strain. Her legs ached from constant movement over rough ground. Her shoulders burned where the rifle sling cut into them. The skin on her face and hands had started to crack from sun exposure despite her makeshift head covering. She'd eaten her last energy bar at dawn, which meant she was running on water and willpower alone. But she was making progress. By noon, she estimated she'd covered another 15 miles. That put her maybe 35 miles from Rally Point Bravo. One more hard push and she'd make it. If she could survive one more hard push. The heat was worse today, the sun beating down with physical force. Sarah's vision started to blur at the edges, her thoughts growing fuzzy. She recognized the signs of heat exhaustion, the first steps toward heat stroke that could kill within hours. She needed water, needed shade, needed rest. She found a narrow canyon cutting through a ridgeline and followed it deeper. The walls blocked the worst of the sun, and the temperature dropped maybe 10 degrees in the shade. At the canyon's end, she discovered something that made her heart race with hope. A seep, water trickling from the rock face, no more than a few drops per minute, but steady and clear. Below it, a small pool had formed, maybe 6 inches deep and 2 feet across. Birds had been here, their tracks visible in the mud. A javelina, the wild pigs native to the desert, had wallowed in the shallows. Sarah approached slowly, aware that water sources were often defended by the desert's more dangerous residents. Rattlesnakes love seeps, coiling in the shade near water, waiting for prey to come drink. But she saw no snakes, heard no warning rattle. She knelt by the pool, used her shirt to filter the water again, and drank deeply. The water was cold, shockingly so after the desert heat. It came from deep underground, filtered through layers of stone, clean and sweet. Sarah drank until her stomach protested, then filled her canteen and drank some more. The cool water on her skin, the moisture soaking into her dehydrated tissues felt like resurrection. She sat back against the canyon wall and allowed herself a moment of weakness. Just a moment. Her hands were shaking, her breathing ragged. She'd pushed hard, maybe too hard, and her body was demanding payment. As she rested, Sarah noticed something odd carved into the canyon wall above the seep. Weathered symbols, old and faint. Navajo petroglyphs, the kind her grandfather had shown her in the Mojave. Markers left by people who traveled these paths centuries ago, before roads and cities and modern navigation. Among the symbols, one caught her eye. A simple circle with a line pointing northwest. Direction markers. The old people had used this seep too, and they'd left signs for those who came after. Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. Even now, centuries later, The knowledge of those who'd survived this desert was helping her. She traced the symbol with her finger, a silent thank you to people she'd never know. Get up, she told herself. You're not done yet. But her body refused to obey. The combination of exertion, heat, and stress had depleted her beyond immediate recovery. She needed real rest, needed food, needed more than willpower to keep moving. Sarah's vision darkened at the edges. She fought against it, knowing that losing consciousness in the desert was often the last mistake people made. But the darkness came anyway, pulling her down into unconsciousness despite her resistance. She dreamed of her father, saw him clearly for the first time in years, not the fading photograph on her dresser, but the living man. He stood on a frozen ridge in Korea, snow falling around him, rifle in his hands, young and scared and trying not to show it. Dad, she said in the dream. He turned to her and she saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear she felt now. I'm scared, she admitted. Good, her father said. Fear keeps you sharp. It's only when you stop being afraid that you die. Did you die scared? He smiled, sad and understanding. I died knowing my daughter would be braver than me, stronger, better. I'm not strong enough for this. You're exactly strong enough. You're a McKenna. We don't know how to quit. Sarah woke to find the sun lower in the sky, late afternoon shadows stretching across the canyon. She'd lost hours to unconsciousness, hours she couldn't afford. But the rest had helped. Her hands were steadier, her thinking clearer. She drank again from the seep, forced herself to move slowly despite the urgency hammering in her chest. Rushing now would just create more problems. She needed to be smart, needed to be deliberate. As she prepared to leave the canyon, Sarah heard voices. Men, speaking Spanish, somewhere above on the canyon rim. They'd found her trail, followed it here. She had maybe minutes before they descended into the canyon and found the seep. Found her. Sarah looked at the canyon walls. 40 feet high, nearly vertical, volcanic rock with minimal handholds. Impossible to climb quickly, especially in her weakened state. The canyon only had one exit, the way she'd come in, and that's where the hunters would enter. She was trapped. For 5 long seconds, Sarah felt panic rising in her throat. Then training took over, and with it, her grandfather's voice. When the desert traps you, little hawk, remember that the trap works both ways. Sarah smiled, a fierce expression that held no humor. The hunters thought they had her cornered. They were about to learn that cornered was exactly where she was most dangerous. She moved quickly, gathering materials. Dried cholla branches, their wood hollow and light. Loose rocks from the canyon floor. Her rifle with its last 2 full magazines. The knife at her belt. The voices grew closer. Sarah could hear boots on stone now, the hunters descending into the canyon. 3 men, maybe 4, all armed, all confident they'd finally cornered their prey. They were right about the cornered part. Sarah positioned herself in the narrowest part of the canyon, where the walls pinched together to maybe 10 feet across. The perfect choke point. She piled loose rocks to create a barricade that would force the hunters to climb over or go around, slowing them down. Behind the barricade, she placed the dried cholla branches, arranged carefully. Then she waited. The first man entered the canyon cautiously, rifle up, scanning for threats. He was a professional, moving with the controlled grace of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He spotted the barricade, signaled to his companions behind him. Sarah let him get closer, waited until he was committed, until turning back would mean exposing himself. Then she stood up from behind her cover and aimed her M4 at the cholla branches she'd carefully prepared. The man saw her, started to bring his rifle around. Sarah fired a single shot into the cholla pile. Dried cholla, when it burns, goes up like gasoline. The branches exploded into flame, creating a wall of fire in the narrow canyon. The smoke, thick and acrid, billowed up and out, filling the confined space. The hunter reeled back, momentarily blinded, choking on smoke. His companions behind him shouted in alarm. Sarah used their confusion to move. She scrambled up the canyon wall on the opposite side from where the hunters had entered, using the smoke as cover. The rock tore at her hands, ripped her clothing, but adrenaline pushed her past the pain. She reached a ledge 10 feet up, pulled herself over, and kept climbing. Below her, the hunters were trying to fight through the smoke and flames. One fired blindly, bullets sparking off stone far from where Sarah climbed. She didn't return fire, didn't waste ammunition. Just kept climbing, pushing her exhausted body to its absolute limit. She reached the canyon rim as the sun touched the western mountains. Below her, the hunters were still dealing with the fire, arguing about whether to pursue or wait for the flames to die down. Sarah didn't wait to hear their decision. She ran. Northwest, always northwest, toward Rally Point Bravo, toward Hatcher and Bull, and the hope of extraction. Her lungs burned, her legs felt like lead, her hands left blood on the rocks she used for balance. But she ran. As darkness fell on her second day in the desert, Sarah McKenna was still alive, still moving, still fighting. Behind her, Keller's hunters regrouped and resumed their pursuit, but they were hours behind now, disorganized and angry. Ahead of her, 30 miles of brutal terrain separated her from safety. But for the first time since being abandoned, Sarah felt something other than desperation. She felt hope, and in the desert night, under stars that had watched countless struggles between humans and this merciless land, hope was enough to keep moving. The hunt continued, but Sarah was no longer just prey. She was a warrior using every skill, every lesson, every ounce of knowledge her grandfather and father and Hatcher had given her. And she was winning. Sarah ran through the night until her body simply refused to continue. Not a gradual slowdown, but a complete collapse, her legs buckling mid-stride, sending her sprawling across desert hardpan. She lay there gasping, tasting blood from where she'd bitten her tongue, feeling the world spin even though she was flat on the ground. 3 days now. 3 days of running and hiding and surviving on willpower alone. The energy bars were long gone, the water from the seep had sustained her through yesterday, but her canteen was empty again, and dawn was coming fast. She could see it painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and amber, beautiful and merciless. Sarah forced herself to hands and knees, then to her feet. Every muscle screamed protest. Her vision swam with exhaustion and dehydration. The rational part of her brain, the part trained in survival medicine, cataloged the symptoms: advanced dehydration, severe caloric deficit, possibly early-stage kidney failure from the combination of heat stress and inadequate fluid intake. She had maybe 12 hours left before her body shut down completely. Rally Point Bravo was still 20 miles northwest, the old silver mine where Hatcher said he'd wait, 15 miles northwest of the compound they'd tried to hit. 20 miles that might as well have been 200 in her current condition. But the alternative was lying down and dying, and Sarah McKenna had not come this far, had not fought this hard, to give up within sight of salvation. She walked, one foot in front of the other, using her rifle as a walking stick. The sun climbed behind her, and with it came the heat. By the time she'd covered 2 miles, the temperature was already pushing 90. By 3 miles, her tongue had swollen in her mouth, making breathing difficult. The landscape had changed during the night. The open desert gave way to rougher country, old volcanic flows creating fields of black basalt that absorbed heat and radiated it back like an oven. Ancient lava tubes and collapsed calderas made navigation treacherous. Sarah stumbled more than walked, catching herself on rocks that tore new wounds in her hands. She was so focused on the ground in front of her that she almost walked past the cluster of buildings without seeing them. It wasn't much. 2 structures, weathered wood and rusted corrugated metal, slowly being reclaimed by the desert. An old mining operation from the looks of it, probably copper given the green staining on nearby rocks. The kind of place that appeared on old maps but nobody visited anymore, too remote and too picked over to interest even scavengers. Sarah stared at the buildings, her heat-addled brain trying to make sense of what she was seeing. This wasn't Rally Point Bravo. That was still miles away. This was something else entirely. Some forgotten mining camp she hadn't known existed. She should keep moving. Every minute mattered, but her body had reached its limit, and the shade those buildings offered called to her like a siren song. Sarah stumbled toward the larger structure. The door was missing entirely, just an open rectangle leading into darkness. She pushed inside, grateful for the shade even though the interior was still oven hot. That's when she saw the water bottle. One plastic gallon jug sitting against the far wall, cap removed, positioned as if someone had just set it down. Sarah's rational mind screamed trap, but her dying body didn't care. She lurched forward, grabbed the bottle, brought it to her lips. "You should sip it slowly," a voice said from behind her, speaking English with a slight Spanish accent. "Drink too fast after dehydration that's severe, and you will vomit it all back up." Sarah spun, bringing her rifle up despite exhaustion, making her movements clumsy. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the morning sun. Old, maybe mid-60s, weathered face and iron gray hair. He wore faded work clothes and held his hands visible and empty. "Easy, soldier," the man said calmly. "I mean no harm. The water is for you." "Who are you?" Sarah's voice came out as a croak. "Someone who has been watching you survive the impossible for 2 days now." The man moved slowly into the building, his hands still visible. "My name is Miguel Torres, and I know who you are, Captain Sarah McKenna." Sarah's finger stayed on the trigger, but something about the old man's bearing, the way he stood with military straightness despite his age, made her hesitate. "How do you know my name?" "I make it my business to know what happens in this desert. It has been my home for many years." Miguel's eyes were kind, but sad. "I saw the gun battle 3 nights ago. Saw you draw the hunters away while your team escaped. Since then, I have been leaving water along likely paths, hoping to keep you alive long enough to talk." "Talk about what?" "About General Victor Keller. About the compound he operates 30 miles east of here. About the fact that we share a common enemy." Miguel's face hardened with old pain. "That man destroyed my life, Captain McKenna. If you truly plan to bring him down, I want to help." Sarah's training screamed that this was too convenient. But her gut, honed by years of reading people in combat zones, said the old man was telling the truth. And the water in her hands was real, not poisoned or drugged, just water. She lowered her rifle slightly and drank, forcing herself to take small sips despite her body's screaming need. "Start talking," she said between sips, "and make it convincing." Miguel sat down on an overturned crate, moving like a man with old injuries that never heal properly. 20 years ago, I was a colonel in the Mexican Special Forces. I commanded a unit tasked with counter-narcotics operations along the border region. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "Your General Keller was assigned as liaison officer for a joint task force. We worked together for several years. He was professional then, dedicated to the mission, or so I believed." "What changed?" "The cartels made him an offer. Money, power, everything the military could not provide. At first he refused, but they were patient, and eventually they found his price." Miguel's voice went flat. "My unit had been investigating American involvement in weapons smuggling. We did not know it was Keller at first, but we were getting close." Sarah drank more water, feeling strength slowly returning. "What happened?" "Keller arranged an ambush. 23 men under my command, Captain. The finest soldiers Mexico had produced. The cartels slaughtered them." Miguel's hands clenched. "I survived only because I was away that day, meeting with American officials. By the time I returned, my men were dead, and Keller had filed reports blaming my tactical failures. He destroyed your career. He destroyed my life, made it impossible to seek justice through official channels. I had no proof, only suspicions. The American military protected him. The Mexican government abandoned me." Miguel looked up at her. "So I went underground. I have spent 15 years gathering evidence, documenting his operations, waiting for someone who could make it matter." Sarah studied the old man's face, reading truth in every line. "You've been living out here? In the desert?" "I have a small shelter 10 miles north. Solar power, water cistern, enough to survive. I grow what I can, supplement with supplies from a town 40 miles away." Miguel smiled without humor. "It is not much of a life, but it is mine, and it keeps me close to Keller's operation. Lets me watch, document, prepare." "Prepare for what?" Miguel stood, moved to a corner of the room and pulled back a tarp. Underneath were 2 file boxes, weathered but intact. 15 years of evidence, shipping manifests I recovered from abandoned trucks, photographs taken from distance, financial records I pieced together from fragments. Everything I could gather about Keller's network. Sarah moved to the boxes, started looking through the contents. The documentation was extensive, meticulously organized. Some of it matched what Hatcher had shown her, but there was much more. Names, dates, locations. A web of corruption stretching across 2 countries. "This is incredible work," Sarah said. "Why didn't you take it to authorities yourself?" "I tried, multiple times, but who listens to a disgraced Mexican officer with an axe to grind?" Miguel's voice carried bitter experience. "Every time I approached American agencies, my reports disappeared. Mexican authorities would not touch it, too afraid of Keller's connections. I needed someone inside the system, someone with credibility." And I'm that someone. You are an American soldier. If you testify, if you present this evidence along with your own account, people will listen. Miguel met her eyes. I know you seek the ledger Keller keeps in his command center. That is good. That is important. But this evidence provides context, shows the full scope of his operation. Together, we can ensure he faces everything he has coming. Sarah closed the file box, her tactical mind already working through implications. Keller's compound. Tell me about its defenses. Miguel pulled out a hand-drawn map, surprisingly detailed. 60 to 80 men typically. Mix of cartel soldiers and private contractors. The compound centers on an old ranch house, fortified and expanded. Main vulnerability is their water supply. He pointed to a mark on his map. Deep well on the eastern perimeter, electric pump powered by generator. In this heat, with that many men, they consume hundreds of gallons daily. If their water supply failed, the compound would become untenable within 48 hours. Sarah studied the map, thinking, I can't destroy the well. They just truck in water from elsewhere. But if the water became contaminated, Miguel said slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes, if it made them sick without being immediately obvious, they'd all be incapacitated before they understood what was happening. Sarah looked up at him. I need plants, specific desert plants that contain toxins. Miguel's eyes widened. You know how to do this? My grandfather was Navajo. He taught me about desert medicine, about which plants heal and which plants harm. Sarah's voice was steady. I can create something that will sicken them without killing them. Disable the entire compound without firing a shot. Where did you learn such things? From someone who understood that nature provides everything we need. We just have to know how to use it. Sarah stood, feeling strength returning with the water she'd drunk. Can you help me find what I need? Miguel stood as well, and for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled with something approaching hope. It would be my honor, Captain. It has been 15 years since I had a mission. I had forgotten what purpose feels like. They spent the next hour planning. Miguel knew the terrain intimately, knew where different plants grew, which trails would get them there fastest. He provided more water, some dried food he'd brought, even a crude map showing the route to Rally Point Bravo. Your colonel will be there, Miguel asked. He said 48 hours. I'm cutting it close, but I'll make it. After we gather what you need, I can guide you most of the way. The terrain between here and there, I know it well. Sarah hesitated. You've already done enough, taken enough risk. Risk? Miguel laughed, a sound like gravel shifting. Captain, I am a dead man already. Dead to my country, dead to my former life. The only question is whether my death means something. You give me the chance to answer that question. They set out an hour later. Moving through country Sarah would never have navigated alone. Miguel knew paths she couldn't see, shortcuts that saved hours of walking. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd walked these trails countless times. The plants you need, Miguel said as they walked, they are dangerous even to collect. I know. My grandfather showed me how to handle them safely. Sarah paused, studying a cluster of bushes. There, datura, Jimson weed. The plant grew in the shade of a rock outcropping, its white trumpet flowers closed against the morning heat. Sarah used her knife to cut seed pods, wrapping her hands in cloth torn from her shirt for protection. The seeds were concentrated with alkaloids that could disable a grown man with just a small dose. You are certain about the dosage? Miguel asked. Too much and you kill them. I'm certain. My grandfather taught me that every plant has two faces, healer or killer. The difference is knowledge and intent. Sarah carefully placed the seed pods in a cloth bag Miguel had provided. I intend to disable, not murder. There's a difference. They spent hours gathering materials. Datura seeds for their hallucinogenic and paralytic properties. Oleander leaves, cardiac toxins that cause severe gastric distress. Desert tobacco for concentrated nicotine. Sarah worked methodically, remembering lessons from 3 decades ago, grateful now for every story her grandfather had told. By mid-afternoon, they had everything she needed. Miguel led her to a small spring hidden in a narrow canyon, a place he said nobody else knew about. Sarah used the water to begin extraction, crushing seeds to release oils, boiling leaves to concentrate toxins, mixing compounds in proportions that would cause brutal sickness without being lethal. Miguel watched with something like awe. Your grandfather taught you well. He taught me that the desert isn't empty. It's full of everything we need if we know how to see it. Sarah carefully strained liquid through cloth. These plants have been used for thousands of years, for medicine, for ceremonies, for war when necessary. I'm just applying old knowledge to a new problem. As the sun set, Sarah had nearly a gallon of concentrated poison, enough to contaminate the compound's water supply, sicken every man there, create chaos that would let her infiltrate and retrieve Keller's ledger. When will you go? Miguel asked. Tonight. The longer I wait, the more time Keller has to locate my team. This ends now. You cannot do this alone. I have to. You've taken enough risk already. Miguel shook his head firmly. For 15 years, I have waited for this moment. You think I will stay behind now when justice is finally possible? His voice carried the weight of all those years. I am not asking permission, Captain. I am telling you that I will help. Sarah started to argue, but something in Miguel's face stopped her. This was about more than tactics or safety. This was about a man's honor, about finally facing the demons that had driven him into exile. All right, she said quietly, but we do this smart. No unnecessary risks. We contaminate the water and withdraw. Then we wait for the poison to work. And after? After, I infiltrate alone while they're incapacitated. You provide overwatch. Warn me if reinforcements arrive. Sarah met his eyes. When I have the ledger, we extract together and get this evidence to people who can act on it. Miguel extended his hand. Sarah shook it, feeling the calluses earned from 15 years of survival and waiting. Your grandfather would be proud, Miguel said. You honor his teachings. I hope so. Because if this doesn't work, his teachings are all that will be left of me. They rested until midnight, then moved out under a moonless sky. The darkness was absolute, but Miguel navigated by starlight and memory, leading Sarah through terrain that would have been impossible alone. The compound appeared on the horizon 2 hours before dawn, a cluster of lights in the darkness. Miguel led Sarah to a ridge overlooking the facility, a position with clear sight lines and multiple retreat routes. The well is there, Miguel whispered, pointing. Eastern perimeter, near the generator shed. Sarah studied the setup through her scope, just as Miguel had described. Wellhead with electric pump, pipes running to storage tanks, guards patrolling in predictable patterns. Professional security, but not paranoid. They weren't expecting an attack, certainly not from a lone operator they believed was dying in the desert. 2 guards on the well, Sarah murmured. 4-hour rotation, generator runs continuously, cover sound of approach. There, Miguel indicated a drainage culvert, built for flash flood runoff. It runs under the fence line, tight but you can fit. Sarah nodded. I go in at 0400. That's when the guards are most tired, most likely to be inattentive. You stay here, watch my back. And if something goes wrong, then you take your evidence, get it to American authorities. Make sure Keller goes down, even if I don't come back. Miguel gripped her shoulder. You will come back. I have watched you survive the impossible. You are too stubborn to die now. Sarah smiled in the darkness. My grandfather used to say the same thing. At exactly 4 in the morning, Sarah McKenna began her infiltration. She moved like smoke through the darkness, using every shadow, every sound of the generator to mask her approach. The culvert was exactly as tight as it looked, forcing her to exhale completely just to squeeze through. But she made it. Inside the compound perimeter, she moved between buildings, watching guard patterns, timing her movements to gaps in their surveillance. The poison was in a canteen at her hip, carefully sealed. All she needed was 30 seconds at the well, 30 seconds to pour it into the water system. She reached the generator shed, pressed against its wall. The well was 10 feet away, the guards pacing slowly, talking in low voices. Sarah waited, patient as the desert itself, counting their steps, timing their rhythm. Then the guards moved away on their patrol, giving her the opening she needed. Sarah crossed the open ground in 3 seconds, knelt by the wellhead, unscrewed the access port. The poison went in with barely a splash, mixing with the water being pumped up from hundreds of feet below. She resealed the port, wiped away any trace of her presence, and slipped back into shadow. The guards returned 90 seconds later, never knowing death had just touched their water supply. Sarah retraced her path, crawled back through the culvert, and rejoined Miguel on the ridge as the eastern sky began to lighten. It is done? Miguel asked. It is done, now we wait. They watched through the morning as the compound came to life. Men emerging from bunkhouses, heading to mess halls for breakfast and coffee. Guards changing shifts. The routine operations of a facility that had no idea its water supply had been poisoned. By noon, the first signs appeared. A guard bent over, vomiting, another clutching his stomach. Within an hour, a dozen men were visibly sick. By mid-afternoon, the compound was in chaos. Sarah watched with professional detachment as her plan unfolded exactly as designed. The poison was working, incapacitating, but not killing. Men were too sick to stand guard, too weak to investigate what had happened. The leadership was panicking, trying to understand what had struck down half their force. Now, Sarah said, while they're confused and weakened, now I go in and finish this. Miguel handed her a radio. I will warn you if reinforcements come. Sarah checked her rifle one final time, made sure her knife was secure. She had no illusions about what she was walking into. Even sick and disorganized, there were still armed men in that compound. Men who would kill her if they got the chance. But she had come too far, fought too hard, to stop now. Hatcher was waiting at Rally Point Bravo, trusting her to complete the mission. Her father's ghost watched from frozen Korean hills. Her grandfather's spirit rode the desert wind. And Miguel Torres, a man who'd waited 15 years for justice, was counting on her to make it real. Sarah McKenna stood, checked her gear one final time, and started down the ridge toward the compound. Behind her, Miguel Torres watched her go and whispered a prayer, asking that this young warrior who carried so many hopes on her shoulders would survive what came next. The sun climbed toward its apex, and in the desert below, Sarah McKenna walked into the storm. The compound was dying from the inside out, and Sarah McKenna walked through its death throes like a ghost passing through walls. Men lay sprawled in doorways, clutching their stomachs, too sick to care about security. The mess hall had been converted to a makeshift infirmary, overwhelmed with victims of what they thought was food poisoning. Nobody looked twice at another figure in tactical gear moving through the chaos. Sarah kept her rifle low but ready, moving with purpose toward the main building where Miguel had said Keller kept his command center. The two-story structure stood at the compound's heart, reinforced concrete that had probably started life as a ranch house before being converted to military use. Guards should have been posted at every entrance, but the sickness had stripped away those precautions. She was 10 feet from the main entrance when the door opened and Colonel James Hatcher stumbled out, his hands zip-tied behind his back, a private military contractor shoving him forward with a rifle barrel. Sarah froze, her training warring with instinct. Hatcher looked worse than when she'd last seen him 3 days ago. His face was gray with pain and exhaustion, fresh bruises darkening his jaw, but his eyes were alert. Those eyes found Sarah in the shadows, held for just a fraction of a second, then moved on as if he hadn't seen her. The contractor pushed Hatcher toward a vehicle parked near the command center. General wants you moved somewhere more secure than this mess. Sarah's mind raced through options. She could take the contractor now, free Hatcher, but that would alert everyone still functional in the compound. Or she could wait, follow, see where this led. Trust that Hatcher had survived this long because he was too stubborn to die before finishing his mission. She chose to trust. Sarah slipped along the wall, using parked vehicles for cover, watching as the contractor loaded Hatcher into a truck. A second guard joined them, this one looking pale and sweating despite the heat being manageable in the late afternoon shade. The poison was affecting him, but not enough to stop him from functioning. The truck pulled away, heading toward the compound's north gate. Sarah keyed the radio Miguel had given her. They are moving Hatcher. 1 truck, 2 guards, heading north. Miguel's voice crackled back. I see them. They are going to the ranch house, 5 miles from here. Keller uses it as a backup location. Can you get there ahead of them? Yes, but Sarah, my sources say Keller is already at the ranch house. If they are taking Hatcher there, this is personal. He wants to handle his old friend himself. Sarah understood. This wasn't evacuation. This was delivery. Keller wanted Hatcher brought to him for a final reckoning. I am coming, Sarah said. Mark the location and wait for me. She moved quickly now, no longer worried about stealth. The compound was too chaotic to notice one more person leaving. Sarah slipped through the north gate in the truck's wake, then broke into a run once she was clear of the fence line. 5 miles. In her current condition, still recovering from 3 days in the desert, it should have been impossible. But Sarah had learned that impossible was just another word for difficult, and difficult was just another word for the mission. She ran. The desert twilight painted everything in shades of purple and gold as Sarah covered the ground between compound and ranch house. Miguel's voice guided her over the radio, giving her updates on Hatcher's location, warning her about guards at the ranch perimeter. 4 men outside, maybe more inside. They are taking the hatcher to the main house now. Sarah crested a ridge and saw it below. An old Spanish colonial-style ranch, probably beautiful once, now fortified with razor wire and guard posts. The truck that had carried Hatcher was parked out front, and she could see men dragging her commander inside. She found Miguel in a hide position overlooking the ranch. The old soldier had positioned himself perfectly, with clear sight lines and multiple retreat routes. "You look worse than before," Miguel said, when Sarah collapsed beside him. "I feel it." Sarah studied the ranch through her rifle scope. "What is the situation?" "Keller arrived 2 hours ago with 6 men. Personal security, former special operations. The contractors from the compound brought your colonel. That makes 11 hostiles, possibly more inside." "And Hatcher?" "They took him to the main house. I saw Keller waiting on the porch." Miguel's voice went cold. He looked pleased. Sarah swept her scope across the ranch, counting guards, noting positions, calculating odds. 11 to 1 was suicide, even if she'd been fresh. In her current state, exhausted and running on fumes, it was worse than suicide. "I need a diversion," Sarah said. "Something to draw them outside, split their attention." Miguel was quiet for a moment. "I have propane for my camp stove, cached 200 meters west of here. If I could rig it to explode, create chaos while you infiltrate. Too dangerous. I will not ask you to become a bomber." "You are not asking, I am volunteering." Miguel met her eyes. 15 years I have waited for this. You think I fear death now when justice is finally within reach? There has to be another way." "There is not, and you know it." Miguel's voice was firm. "This is what soldiers do. We make the hard choices so others can complete the mission." Sarah wanted to argue, but she recognized the look on Miguel's face. She had seen it before, in the eyes of men who had decided their death could mean something. "How long do you need?" Miguel asked. 20 minutes to get in position. Then hit them from the west while I move from the east." Miguel checked his watch. 30 minutes from now, then. That gives you time to prepare." He handed her bottles of water from his pack. "Drink. You are no good if you collapse." Sarah drank while Miguel prepared. She watched him work with the efficiency of decades of experience, and when he was done, he could trigger the explosion remotely and have maybe 10 seconds to get clear. "Maybe?" "Miguel," Sarah said, "when this is over, when we bring Keller down, I will make sure everyone knows what you did. Your men will be remembered as heroes." The old soldier smiled. "I stopped caring about remembrance years ago. I only care about justice." He checked his rifle. "But thank you for giving an old man the chance to die standing instead of hiding." They synchronized watches. 28 minutes until the diversion. Sarah used the time to circle around to the east side of the ranch, moving carefully through the failing light. She found a position behind an old water tower, close enough to see the main house clearly. Through the windows, she could see movement. Keller and Hatcher in what looked like a study, 2 guards flanking the door. She could not hear what they were saying, but she could read body language. Keller talking, gesturing, making some kind of argument. Hatcher sitting rigid, his face expressionless. Sarah's radio crackled. 5 minutes, Miguel said softly. She checked her rifle, made sure her knife was loose in its sheath. 2 magazines left, maybe 60 rounds total. Against 11 trained operators, it would have to be enough. The explosion when it came was spectacular. A fireball mushroomed into the twilight sky, followed seconds later by the concussive boom. Sarah saw guards react immediately, weapons coming up, half of them running toward the explosion while the others stayed at their posts, but were distracted, looking west instead of east. Sarah moved. She covered the open ground in seconds, using the water tower's shadow to mask her approach. The first guard never saw her coming. She hit him with her rifle butt, dropping him unconscious. The second turned at the sound, started to raise his weapon. Sarah shot him twice in the chest, suppressed rounds that sounded like coughs in the chaos. She was through the back door before anyone realized they were under attack. The interior of the ranch house was expensive furniture and weapons both. The combination of someone trying to maintain respectability while running a criminal operation. Sarah moved through the kitchen, heading toward the study where she had seen Hatcher. A contractor appeared in the hallway, his rifle coming up. Sarah was faster, putting 3 rounds center mass before he could fire. The man went down, and she stepped over him without breaking stride. The study door was ahead, still guarded by the 2 men she had seen through the window. They had heard the gunshots, were alert and ready. Sarah had no choice but to go through them directly. She came around the corner firing, dropping the first guard before he could react. The second got his rifle up, squeezed off a burst that tore chunks from the wall beside Sarah's head. She rolled, came up shooting, and put him down with shots to the pelvis and chest. Then she kicked open the study door and found herself face to face with General Victor Keller. He stood behind a massive oak desk, one hand resting on Hatcher's shoulder, the other holding a pistol pointed at Sarah's chest. Hatcher sat in a chair in front of the desk, his hands still zip-tied, his face showing careful neutrality. "Captain McKenna," Keller said, his voice cultured and calm despite the chaos erupting around them. "I am genuinely impressed. 3 days in the desert, poisoning my compound, and now this. You are everything James said you were." Sarah kept her rifle trained on Keller's center mass. "Let him go." "Or what? You will shoot me?" "I do not think so. Not with my pistol pointed at your colonel's head." Keller's smile was pleasant. "Lower your weapon, Captain. Let us talk like civilized people." "There is nothing civilized about you." Strong words from someone who just murdered 6 of my men. "They were not murdered. They were combatants in an illegal operation. I am doing my duty." Keller laughed, genuine amusement in the sound. "Duty? James, did you hear that? She sounds just like you did decades ago. So certain about right and wrong, so confident in the righteousness of the cause." "Let him go," Sarah repeated. "I told you," Keller said, pressing the pistol against Hatcher's temple. "Lower your weapon first. Then we will discuss terms." Sarah's mind raced through scenarios. She could shoot Keller, but he would kill Hatcher in reflex. She could try for a hostage exchange, but Keller had no reason to honor it. She could stall, hope that Miguel was still alive and could provide backup. Hatcher made the decision for her. "Do it, Captain," he said quietly. "Lower your weapon." "Sir, that is an order." Sarah lowered her rifle slowly, watching Keller's eyes for any sign of treachery. The general smiled and gestured to a chair. "Sit. Please, I promise this will be painless if you cooperate." Sarah sat, keeping her hands visible, calculating distances and angles. Keller moved around the desk, his pistol never wavering. "You know what I find fascinating," Keller said? "How similar we are, you and I. Both willing to break rules to accomplish our missions. Both understanding that sometimes the system is too broken to work within. We are nothing alike. No, you poisoned my men with biological agents. War crime by any definition. You infiltrated without authorization. You killed 6 people tonight." Keller shrugged. "Tell me how that is different from what I do." "I did it to stop you. You did it for profit. I did it to fund operations the government will not support. Black operations that keep this country safe." Keller's voice hardened. "Do you think bureaucrats understand what war really requires? I fought for 40 years, watched good men die because politicians were afraid of bad press." Hatcher spoke up, his voice rough. "You became what you fought against, Victor. You became a warlord with a flag. I became effective, something you never managed in all your years of following orders." Keller turned to Hatcher. "Do you remember that operation in '71, when we lost 12 men waiting for permission to save ourselves?" "I remember." "Tell her. Tell your protege what happens when you follow the rules blindly." Hatcher's face showed old pain. "We were on a mission to extract personnel from a compromised location. Intelligence said light resistance. We arrived to find heavy opposition. Victor called for support. Command denied it, said the risk to nearby civilians was too high. We lost 12 men that night," Keller said. 12 boys who died because someone in an air-conditioned office was afraid of political fallout. And you, James, you defended that decision. Said the system was right to be cautious. I said the system made a mistake, not that the system was wrong. What is the difference? "The difference," Hatcher said, meeting his old friend's eyes, "is that systems can be fixed. People can learn from mistakes. But when you decide you know better than everyone else, when you put yourself above the rules entirely, you stop being a soldier and become a tyrant." Keller's expression hardened. "I am not a tyrant. I am a realist." "You are a criminal," Sarah said. "You sell weapons to cartels. You profit from drug trafficking. You killed 23 Mexican soldiers to protect your operation." For the first time, Keller's composure cracked. Those soldiers were acceptable losses in a larger campaign. They were men with families, with children. They died because you valued money over honor. I valued mission success over bureaucratic hand-wringing. Keller's voice rose. "You think I wanted this? I gave 40 years to the Army. I bled for this country. And what did I get? Politicians who do not understand warfare making decisions about life and death. A system so broken it cannot function. So you broke it further, Hatcher said quietly, and called it patriotism. Keller swung the pistol toward Hatcher, his finger tightening on the trigger. Sarah tensed, ready to move despite knowing she was too far away. Then the window exploded inward, and Miguel Torres came through in a shower of glass. The old soldier had timed it perfectly, waiting for the moment when Keller's attention was divided. He hit Keller like a linebacker, driving him away from Hatcher, the pistol flying from his hand. The two men went down in a tangle of limbs and fury. Sarah grabbed her rifle, but she could not shoot without risking Miguel. Instead, she turned to Hatcher, using her knife to cut his zip ties. "Are you hit?" she asked. "No, help Miguel." But Miguel did not need help. He had Keller on the ground, his hands around the general's throat, 15 years of rage finally finding release. Keller struggled, trying to break free, but Miguel's grip was iron. "For my men," Miguel hissed. "For every soldier you betrayed. For every life you destroyed." Keller's face was turning purple, his struggles weakening. Sarah realized Miguel was going to kill him, choke the life from him right there on the floor. "Miguel, no," she said. "We need him alive. He needs to face trial." "He needs to face God," Miguel snarled. "Please." Sarah moved closer, kept her voice calm. "You are not a murderer. You are a soldier. Let him face justice the right way." Miguel's hands trembled, caught between rage and reason. For a long moment, Sarah thought he would finish it. Then he released Keller's throat, shoving him away in disgust. Keller gasped for air, coughing and choking. Sarah kept her rifle on him while Hatcher found flex cuffs and secured the general's hands. "You have no authority here," Keller rasped. "You are operating illegally." "Actually," a new voice said from the doorway, "they are 40 yards inside Arizona. Has been American soil since the border was surveyed in 1853. Sarah turned to see Bull Garrett standing there, his saw at the ready, Michael Chen behind him with a medical kit. Both looked exhausted but very much alive. "Took you long enough," Hatcher said, allowing himself a small smile. "Had to convince the Border Patrol to let us through their checkpoint," Bull said. "Showed them some of Miguel's evidence, explained the situation. They are very interested in having a conversation with the general here." As if on cue, Sarah heard vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, officials sounding. Through the window, she could see lights flashing red and blue. Keller's face went pale. "This will not stick. I have friends in Washington. I will be out in 24 hours. "Maybe," Hatcher said, standing over the man who had once been his closest friend, "or maybe those friends will decide you are too much liability. Maybe they will let you take the fall to protect themselves. That is what happens when you build empires on betrayal, Victor. Eventually, everyone betrays you." Border Patrol agents flooded into the house, followed by DEA and FBI. Sarah watched as they took Keller into custody, read him his rights, began the process that would either bring justice or prove the system was too broken to save. Miguel stood apart, watching with ancient eyes. Sarah moved to stand beside him. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I did it for my men, not for thanks." "I know, but you have it anyway." Sarah held out her hand. "The evidence you collected, it is going to make a difference. Real change." Miguel shook her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "Perhaps, or perhaps the system will protect itself and nothing will change. But at least we tried. At least we stood up." Federal agents began cataloging the scene, taking statements, securing evidence. Sarah found herself sitting on the porch steps, suddenly too exhausted to stand. Michael appeared with his medical kit. "Let me check you over, ma'am," he said. "You look like you have been through hell." "Just the desert. Close enough." Michael worked efficiently, checking her vitals, cleaning cuts, forcing her to drink electrolyte solution. "You are severely dehydrated, borderline malnourished, and showing signs of heat injury. You should be in a hospital. I will rest when we are done here." "Ma'am, with respect, you are done. The mission is over. We got Keller, we got the evidence. You can stand down." Sarah looked at the chaos of federal agents securing the ranch, at Keller being led away in handcuffs, at Hatcher giving his statement with quiet authority. Michael was right. The mission was over. So why did it feel unfinished? Hatcher found her an hour later, after the initial statements were taken and the Federals had control of the scene. He sat beside her on the steps, moving like a man twice his age. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I have been better, sir. You?" "Same." Hatcher was quiet for a moment, watching the activity. "What you did out there in the desert? That was remarkable, Sarah. Your father would have been proud. I just did what you trained me to do. No, you did more than that. You adapted. You used knowledge most soldiers have forgotten. You proved that the old ways still matter. Hatcher turned to look at her. Miguel told me about the poison, about using desert plants. That is not something I taught you. My grandfather did a long time ago. Then he was a wise man, and you honored his teachings by using them to save lives instead of taking them. Sarah felt something crack in her chest, some wall she had been holding in place for 3 days. I thought I was going to die out there, sir, multiple times. I thought I had failed you, failed the mission. But you did not. You kept going. That is what separates good soldiers from great ones. Not skill or strength, but refusal to quit when quitting would be easier. They sat in comfortable silence, two soldiers at the end of a long mission. Around them, the machinery of justice ground into motion, but for this moment, they could rest. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now we go home. We testify. We make sure Keller faces everything he has coming. Hatcher's voice hardened, and we fix the parts of the system that let him operate for so long. That is the real mission, Sarah. Not just stopping one corrupt general, but making sure the next one cannot do what he did. Do you think we can? Fix the system, I mean. I think we have to try, because the alternative is accepting that men like Keller are inevitable, and I refuse to accept that. Bull approached, his bulk blocking the porch light. Colonel, the Border Patrol commander wants to talk about coordination, something about jurisdiction. Hatcher stood, wincing as his cancer-racked body protested. This is going to be a long night. Sir, Sarah said, you're cancer. You need treatment. I will get treatment. After I make sure this sticks, after I testify, after I see Keller in a cell where he belongs. Hatcher smiled. I have come this far. I can make it a little further. He walked away, leaving Sarah alone on the steps. She looked up at the stars, the same stars that had guided her through the desert, and wondered what her grandfather would think of all this. Miguel found her as the federal agents were preparing to transport Keller. The old soldier looked diminished somehow, as if finally achieving his goal had taken something vital from him. What will you do now? Sarah asked. I do not know. 15 years I have lived for this moment. Now that it is here, I find I have no plan for after. Miguel looked at the desert stretching away into darkness. Perhaps I will go back to Mexico, see if there is anything left of the man I used to be. You are a hero, Miguel. You should be recognized as such. I am a ghost who finally found peace. He held out a small leather journal. This is for you. My personal record of everything I witnessed. Insurance in case official evidence somehow disappears. Sarah took the journal, felt its weight. Thank you for everything. No, thank you, Captain McKenna, for giving an old man the chance to face his demons, for letting me die standing. You are not dead yet, Miguel smiled. No, but I am at peace, and for a soldier that is victory enough. He walked away into the darkness, and though Sarah did not know it then, she would hear of him again. Stories filtering back across the border about a man who returned to Mexico and was welcomed as a hero by the families of fallen soldiers. A man who lived 3 more years in quiet dignity before passing peacefully in his sleep, his mission finally complete. But that night, watching him disappear into the desert he had called home for 15 years, Sarah felt she was witnessing the end of an era. The old warriors, the ones who remembered what honor meant, were fading. It fell to the next generation to carry those values forward. The drive back took hours, following Border Patrol escorts. Sarah sat in the back of a federal vehicle, too exhausted to process everything that had happened. Hatcher rode with her, silent but present. As they crossed into New Mexico, the sun began to rise over the desert, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Sarah watched the landscape transform from darkness to light and thought about cycles, about endings and beginnings. The mission was over. Keller was in custody. Miguel had found his peace. But the real work, the hard work of making sure this betrayal meant something, was just beginning. Sarah McKenna looked at the rising sun and knew she was ready for it. 3 months later, Sarah McKenna stood in a hearing room in Washington, D.C., raising her right hand to swear an oath she had already lived by her entire adult life. To tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The irony was not lost on her. She had spent 3 days in hell telling truths the desert already knew. Now she would tell them to men in suits who had never felt sand under their boots. The military tribunal was closed to the public, but the room still felt crowded. Hatcher sat in the front row, thinner than he had been 3 months ago, the cancer eating him from inside despite aggressive treatment. Bull Garrett sat beside him, a solid presence. Michael Chen took notes, documenting everything for the historical records someone would eventually write. General Victor Keller sat at the defense table, his once immaculate uniform replaced by civilian clothes. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by captivity and the weight of evidence piled against him. But his eyes still burned with conviction that he had been right, that history would vindicate him. The prosecutor, a Navy JAG captain named Morrison, stood to begin direct examination. Captain McKenna, please state your current assignment for the record. I am currently on temporary assignment to the Judge Advocate General Corps, providing testimony in multiple cases related to this investigation. And prior to this assignment, I was an operator with the Army's 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. I held that position for 3 years. Morrison walked her through the events methodically. The initial briefing from Hatcher, the mission that went wrong, the 3 days in the Sonoran Desert, the infiltration and Keller's arrest. Sarah answered each question precisely, neither embellishing nor minimizing. Just the facts, delivered in the flat tone of someone who had lived them. When Morrison asked about the poison she had used to incapacitate Keller's forces, Sarah saw several tribunal members lean forward. I used a mixture of naturally occurring desert plants, Sarah explained. Datura stramonium, commonly called Jimson weed, for its anticholinergic properties. Nerium oleander for cardiac glycosides that cause severe gastric distress. Nicotiana species for concentrated nicotine. The combination creates temporary incapacitation without lethality. Where did you learn such techniques? Morrison asked. From my grandfather. He was Navajo, spent his life as a park ranger in the Mojave Desert. He taught me that every plant has 2 aspects. Used properly, they heal. Used improperly, they harm. I chose dosages that would disable without killing. Why not kill the enemy combatants? Sarah met Morrison's eyes. Because I am a soldier, not an executioner. My mission was to neutralize a threat and retrieve evidence. Mass casualties were not necessary to achieve that objective. The defense attorney, a civilian lawyer named Carver, who specialized in defending generals, stood for cross-examination. He was expensive and polished, the kind of lawyer who made his living finding technicalities. Captain McKenna, is it true that you operated without official authorization during the mission in question? Yes. You had no orders from your chain of command? I had orders from Colonel Hatcher, my direct superior at the time. Colonel Hatcher was retired from active duty. He had no authority to issue operational orders. He was a superior officer requesting assistance with a matter of urgent national security. I assessed the situation and determined his request was legitimate. Carver smiled like a shark. So you decided on your own authority that Colonel Hatcher's extra-legal mission took precedence over Army regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice? I decided that stopping a corrupt general from selling American weapons to drug cartels was worth bending a few regulations. Yes, bending regulations? Captain, you poisoned 60 men with biological agents. That is a violation of the Biological Weapons Convention, a war crime under international law. Sarah felt her temper rise but kept her voice level. I used naturally occurring plant compounds to create temporary incapacitation. No different than using tear gas or pepper spray. The convention prohibits weaponized pathogens, not botanical extracts applied in controlled doses. A convenient interpretation, an accurate one. Every man I incapacitated survived with no permanent injury. Can General Keller say the same about the 23 Mexican soldiers his cartel allies murdered? Morrison stood. Objection, the witness is not on trial here. Sustain, the presiding officer said. He was a 3-star general named Patterson, a man with 35 years of service and a face that revealed nothing. Counsel will confine questions to the witness's actions, not her opinions on the defendant's conduct. Carver changed tactics. Captain McKenna, you admit you engaged in combat operations on U.S. soil without authorization. You admit you used improvised weapons in violation of established protocols. You admit you took actions that resulted in 6 deaths. How is that different from vigilantism? Sarah leaned forward. Because vigilantes act for personal reasons. I acted to complete a mission that protected national security. General Keller was running an illegal arms trafficking operation that threatened both American and Mexican lives. When official channels failed to stop him, someone had to. And you appointed yourself that someone? Colonel Hatcher appointed me. I simply had the skills required to complete the mission. Carver consulted his notes. These skills you learned from your grandfather, the same grandfather who taught you how to create biological weapons from desert plants. He taught me how to survive, how to use nature's gifts respectfully. He never called it weaponization. He called it knowledge. Knowledge you then used to poison 60 men. Knowledge I used to save American lives and bring a traitor to justice. The testimony went on for hours. Carver attacked every decision Sarah had made, tried to paint her as a rogue operator who had exceeded her authority. Morrison countered by introducing Keller's ledger, the documented evidence of 15 years of weapon sales, the testimony from Mexican authorities about the murdered Special Forces unit. When Sarah finally stepped down, Hatcher caught her eye and nodded once, a small gesture that meant everything. He believed she had done well. The tribunal recessed for the day. Sarah found Hatcher in the hallway, leaning against the wall, his breathing labored. "Sir, you should be resting." "I will rest when this is over." Hatcher straightened with visible effort. "You did well in there. Carver tried to rattle you, but you held firm." He made some good points. "We did operate outside regulations. We operated outside broken regulations to fix a broken system. History will judge whether that was right or wrong." Hatcher's face showed the pain he was trying to hide. "For what it is worth, I believe it was right. We saved lives. We stopped a corrupt officer. We proved the system can still self-correct when good people refuse to look away." They walked slowly toward the parking garage, Hatcher leaning on Sarah more than he would admit. The cancer had advanced despite treatment. The doctors gave him weeks now, maybe a month. He refused to die in a hospital, refused to miss the conclusion of the case he had started. "Have you thought about what comes next?" Hatcher asked. "After this? I have been offered a position, running a new SEER program for Special Operations Forces, teaching advanced survival skills." Sarah helped him into Bull's truck, where the big sergeant waited. "They want to call it the Hatcher Survival School." Hatcher smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen in weeks. "I like that. Training the next generation. Passing on what we learned. It is what you taught me. That warriors are not just fighters. We are teachers. We carry knowledge forward so others do not have to learn the same lessons in blood. Your grandfather will be proud. Your father too." Hatcher settled into the seat, exhausted by even that small exertion. "But more importantly, I am proud. You have become exactly what this army needs. Someone who knows when to follow rules and when to break them. Someone who understands that honor is not about blind obedience, but about doing what is right even when it costs everything." Sarah felt tears threatening and pushed them down. "You are not allowed to die yet, sir. We still have work to do. The work will continue with or without me. That is the point of legacy, Sarah. We build something that survives us." Hatcher closed his eyes. "Now stop being sentimental and let Bull drive. I need rest before tomorrow's session." The tribunal reconvened the next day to hear from Hatcher. Sarah watched from the gallery as her mentor took the stand, looking like death, but speaking with absolute clarity. He walked the tribunal through 40 years of service, through decisions made and mistakes learned from. Then he talked about Keller. "Victor was my best friend," Hatcher said simply. "For 30 years, I trusted him with my life. When I discovered what he had become, it broke something in me. Not because I hated him, but because I understood how he got there." "Please explain," Morrison said. "The system failed us, not once but repeatedly. Good men died waiting for politicians to make decisions. Bureaucrats who never wore a uniform dictated tactics to soldiers in the field. After 40 years, I can count a dozen times I wanted to go rogue, to say the hell with regulations and just do what needed doing." Hatcher's voice was steady. "The difference between Victor and me is that I never crossed that line. I stayed angry, stayed frustrated, but I stayed within the system because I believed it could be fixed." "And General Keller?" "Victor decided he was smarter than the system. He convinced himself that breaking the rules was justified because his intentions were good. That is how it always starts, with good intentions and a righteous cause. But intentions do not matter when you are selling weapons to cartels. Actions matter. Consequences matter." Keller's lawyer stood. "Colonel Hatcher, is it not true that you recruited Captain McKenna for an unauthorized operation? That you yourself operated outside the system you claimed to defend?" Hatcher met Carver's eyes without flinching. "Yes." "Then how are you different from my client?" "Because I was wrong to do so. I should have worked through official channels, even if it took longer. even if it meant Keller escaped justice. Hatcher's voice was quiet but firm. The moment I decided I knew better than the system, I became part of the problem. I have to live with that choice. But I am not on trial here. Victor is. And unlike me, he has no remorse for what he did. The testimony continued, but Sarah saw something change in the tribunal members' faces. Hatcher's admission that he had been wrong, that he accepted responsibility for his choices, carried more weight than any justification could have. He was not defending his actions. He was acknowledging their cost. When Hatcher stepped down, he looked 20 years older. Sarah met him outside the hearing room. "That was brave, sir, admitting fault like that. It was necessary. If I want this tribunal to hold Victor accountable, I have to hold myself accountable too." Hatcher leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "The cancer is winning, Sarah. The doctors say days now, maybe a week. Then stop this. Come back after you have rested. There is no after for me. This is my last mission." Hatcher pushed off the wall, stood straight despite the pain. "But it is not yours. You have decades ahead of you. Make them count." 2 days later, the tribunal delivered its verdict. Sarah sat beside Hatcher as the presiding officer read the findings. This tribunal finds the defendant, General Victor Keller, guilty of all charges: conspiracy to traffic in military weapons, conduct unbecoming an officer, violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, accessory to murder in the deaths of 23 Mexican military personnel. Patterson's voice was flat, emotionless. "The sentence of this tribunal is dismissal from service with loss of all pay and benefits, followed by transfer to civilian authorities for prosecution under federal statutes." Keller stood as the MPs approached. For just a moment, he looked at Hatcher. Whatever he saw there made him look away first. Then he was led from the room, a general no more, just another criminal heading for trial. Hatcher slumped in his seat, and Sarah realized he had been holding himself upright through sheer will. Now that the verdict was delivered, that will was fading. "We won," she said quietly. "No, the system won. We just reminded it how." Hatcher's breathing was shallow now, labored. "Get me outside, Sarah. I do not want to die in this building." Bull helped carry Hatcher to the truck. They drove to Arlington National Cemetery, to a hill overlooking rows of white headstones that stretched to the horizon. Hatcher had requested this, had made arrangements. When his time came, he wanted to see the resting place of the soldiers he had led, the men and women who had trusted him. They sat under an oak tree, the three of them, Hatcher in the middle, Sarah on one side, Bull on the other. The autumn sun was warm, the air carrying the scent of grass and memory. "Tell me something," Hatcher said, his voice barely a whisper. "Did we make a difference? All those years, all those missions, did it matter?" "You made a difference to me," Sarah said. "You taught me what it means to be a soldier. Not just how to fight, but why we fight. How to stay honorable even when the system is broken. You made a difference to every soldier you trained," Bull added, his gruff voice gentle. "There are hundreds of us out there carrying what you taught. That is not nothing, sir." Hatcher smiled, his eyes drifting to the rows of white stones. "I am going to see them soon. All the ones I sent forward. I hope they are not angry that I took so long to follow." "They will understand," Sarah said. "You stayed to finish the mission. That is what leaders do." They sat in silence as the sun moved across the sky. Hatcher's breathing grew slower, more irregular. Sarah knew the signs. She had seen death before, in combat and in hospitals. This was different. This was peaceful. A warrior choosing his ground for the last time. "Sarah," Hatcher said, so quiet she had to lean close to hear, "your father would be proud. I am proud. You are ready." "Ready for what?" "To lead, to teach, to fix what my generation broke." His hand found hers, the grip weak but steady. "Promise me you will not make my mistakes. Promise me you will stay within the system even when it frustrates you. Because that is how we win. Not by breaking the rules, but by making the rules better." "I promise." "Good." Hatcher's eyes closed. "Good." He died there under the oak tree, with 2 soldiers beside him and Arlington's honored dead spread out below. No hospital, no machines, no sterile end. Just a warrior returning to the earth surrounded by warriors. Sarah and Bull sat with him until the sun set, neither willing to move, neither ready to accept that one of the great ones was gone. When the cemetery staff came, they stood and saluted. Then they carried Hatcher's body down the hill together. The funeral was 3 days later. Full military honors, despite the controversy of his last mission. The commandant of Fort Bragg gave the eulogy, speaking of Hatcher's 4 decades of service, his training of thousands of soldiers, his commitment to honor even when it cost him everything. Sarah stood at attention as the honor guard fired their rifles, as the bugler played taps, as the flag was folded and presented to the army for safekeeping. Hatcher had no family left. His wife had died years ago. His legacy was not children, but soldiers. Thousands of them spread across the world, carrying his lessons forward. After the service, a young woman approached Sarah. She was maybe 25, wearing army dress blues with a 75th Ranger Regiment tab. "Captain McKenna, I am Lieutenant Jennifer Garrett, Bull's daughter." Sarah looked at Bull, who shrugged. "She insisted on coming. Wants to try out for selection next year." "Your father is a legend," Sarah said to Jennifer. "Those are big boots to fill." "That is what scares me, ma'am." Jennifer's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "But Colonel Hatcher always said fear was fine as long as you did not let it stop you. So I am trying." Sarah smiled, seeing Bull's determination in his daughter's face. "Your father said Hatcher told you that?" "Yes, ma'am. During a training exercise when I was considering Ranger School, he said fear means you care. It is only when you stop being afraid that you die." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The same thing her father had said in her dream, in the desert when she thought she would die. The same lesson passed down through generations of warriors. "He was right," Sarah said. "And when you go to selection, when they try to break you, remember that fear is just another obstacle to overcome. Like everything else in Delta, it is all about knowledge and will." 6 months later, Sarah McKenna stood in front of 40 students at Fort Bragg, beginning the first session of the Hatcher Survival School. The curriculum she had developed was revolutionary, combining modern special operations tactics with ancient survival knowledge. Students would learn high-tech navigation and star-based wayfinding, combat medicine and desert plant pharmacology, rules of engagement and ethical decision-making under pressure. "This course exists because of 3 people," Sarah told her first class. "Colonel James Hatcher, who believed that warriors must be teachers. My grandfather, Tommy Bluehorse, who taught me that knowledge is the ultimate weapon. And my father, Captain Richard McKenna, who proved that honor matters more than survival." She walked them through the philosophy that would guide their training, that the desert, the mountains, the jungle, any environment was not an enemy, but a teacher. That survival was not about being strongest or most armed, but about being smartest and most adaptable. That a true warrior knew when to follow rules and when to bend them, and the difference between the two. Among the students was Jennifer Garrett, who had passed selection and earned her place in Delta Force. She sat in the front row, taking notes with the same intensity her father brought to every task. After class, Sarah found Bull waiting outside. "She is doing well," Sarah said. "You must be proud." "Terrified is more like it. But yes, proud too." Bull handed Sarah a folder. "Found this in Hatcher's papers. He wanted you to have it after he was gone." Sarah opened the folder. Inside was a letter in Hatcher's precise handwriting, written weeks before his death, but dated for after. "Dear Sarah, if you are reading this, I am dead and you are alive. That is exactly how it should be. The old making way for the young, the teacher stepping aside for the student. I am not good at sentiment, so I will be brief. You were the finest operator I ever trained. More importantly, you were the finest person. You took everything I taught you and made it better. You took your grandfather's wisdom and applied it to modern warfare. You proved that old knowledge and new tactics can coexist. But more than any of that, you proved something I always believed but could never articulate. That honor is not about following rules blindly. It is about understanding why rules exist, respecting their purpose, and having the wisdom to know when circumstances require flexibility. I made mistakes in my life, many of them. The worst was recruiting you for an unauthorized mission and putting your career at risk for my vendetta. I do not regret stopping Keller. I regret the price you paid to help me do it. But you turned that mistake into something meaningful. You are building a program that will train thousands of soldiers in the skills that kept you alive. You are passing forward knowledge that should never have been forgotten. That is how we fix broken systems. Not by breaking them further, but by remembering what worked and teaching it to those who come after. Be the leader I never quite managed to be. Be the teacher your grandfather was. Be the soldier your father died proud to have raised. And when students ask you about honor, about duty, about what it means to be a warrior, tell them this: we are not warriors because we like violence. We are warriors because someone must stand between the innocent and the wolves. We follow rules because civilization requires order. We bend rules when honor demands it, and we teach others so they can make those distinctions for themselves. I am proud of you, Sarah, prouder than words can express. Your friend always, James Hatcher. Sarah read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. Bull stood silent, understanding that some moments required no words. He was a good man, Sarah said finally. The best, Bull agreed. And he chose well when he chose you to carry on. Sarah looked across the training grounds at students practicing the skills she would teach. Young men and women who would face impossible odds and need every advantage to survive. She would give them knowledge. She would give them tools. She would give them the wisdom of 3 generations of warriors. And she would teach them that being a soldier was not about following orders blindly or breaking rules carelessly. It was about understanding the difference, having the wisdom to choose correctly, and the courage to accept the consequences of those choices. 1 year after Hatcher's death, Sarah received a letter from Mexico. It was written in Spanish, which she had Bull translate. Dear Captain McKenna, I am writing on behalf of Miguel Torres, who passed peacefully last month at age 67. Before he died, he asked me to send you this letter and to thank you for giving him the opportunity to die with honor. Miguel spent his final years here in his home village, welcomed as a hero by the families of the soldiers who fell. He never spoke much about his time in the desert or what happened with the American general. But he kept a photograph of you on his wall, and he told everyone who asked that you were the bravest soldier he ever met. He left instructions that his evidence files, the ones he did not give you, should be donated to a museum dedicated to Mexican military history. He wanted people to remember what his men died for and how one American soldier helped bring them justice. He died as he wished, surrounded by the children of his fallen comrades, knowing that their sacrifice had not been forgotten. With respect and gratitude, Father Esteban Ramirez. Sarah put the letter in her desk drawer, next to Hatcher's final message and a photograph of her grandfather. 3 warriors from 3 generations, all teaching her the same lesson in different ways. That honor mattered. That knowledge was power. That sacrifice was not weakness, but the highest form of strength. And that the work was never finished. Each generation faced its own challenges, its own broken systems, its own choice between easy wrong and hard right. Sarah McKenna had made her choice. She would spend the rest of her career teaching others to make theirs. Years later, when students asked her what kept her going through those 3 days in the desert, she would tell them the truth. It was not strength. It was not even courage. It was knowledge passed down from people who survived before me. My grandfather taught me the desert. My father taught me honor. Colonel Hatcher taught me wisdom. All I did was remember their lessons and refuse to quit. Is that all it takes, they would ask? Knowledge and stubbornness? And Sarah would smile, remembering a frozen ridge in Korea, a desert in Arizona, and an oak tree in Arlington. That is all it has ever taken. Every warrior who ever lived, every soldier who ever stood their ground, they all had the same tools: knowledge to understand what must be done, stubbornness to keep going when it would be easier to quit, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two. She would look at her students, these young warriors who would face challenges she could not imagine, and she would see her father, her grandfather, Hatcher, Miguel, all the teachers who had shaped her. You already have everything you need, she would tell them. You just have to decide who you are: someone who waits to be saved, or someone who saves themselves, someone who follows rules blindly, or someone who understands why rules exist, someone who quits when things get hard, or someone who gets hard when things matter. And watching them march off to training, to selection, to wars not yet fought, Sarah knew the legacy was secure. Not because she was special, but because warriors like her father and Hatcher and Miguel had chosen to teach rather than just fight. They had passed forward knowledge that would survive them. And in the desert night, under stars that had watched countless struggles between humans and impossible odds, that knowledge would guide the next generation home, just as it always had, just as it always would. The legacy continued. As your storyteller, I'll be honest. When I found Sarah McKenna's story, I was skeptical. Using desert plants as weapons, surviving 72 hours without water, sounded impossible. Then veterans told me, modern soldiers forgot what grandfathers knew. Old survival skills save lives when technology fails. This isn't just survival, it's about wisdom we're losing. What hit you hardest? The desert tactics, Hatcher's death, or that corruption hiding in plain sight? Drop your thoughts. If you served, share what this meant to you. Subscribe for more untold stories.